Hotep family. My name is Kaba Kamane. We are doing series 2. And one of the things, and we're talking about no distractions. And no distractions as it relates to what I'm looking at is just, we have to be on a certain path. We have to be heading towards somewhere. I always ask my students, my children, where do you see yourself in the next 10 years? So that there's always in us, in each and every one of us, an idea as to where we're headed. We're going someplace. Now, where you see yourself in 10 years may not be where you are. You may be beyond that, or you may be just reaching that. But the idea is that if you are always heading towards someplace, even if you should change where you're headed, at least you know what made you make that change, and you're always, again, looking at the next 10 years. A lot of stuff's been going on since the last presidential election. And I'm hearing a lot of people talk about what they're looking at, what they're experiencing. And I just can't help but remember what Professor John Henry Clark used to always say to us when he'd be talking to us. And we'd be talking about something going on that we really should not be surprised at. And we say, oh, I'm surprised. And Dr. Clark used to always say, I'm surprised that you're surprised. And I really have to say this because last week during our Facebook Live, we spoke about what's going on in the border as it relates to our brothers and sisters that are coming up from Central America. And we were talking about the reality of how inhumane their treatment is. And even this week, it has become even more inhumane. And I remember when I was doing the research on our documentary on Malcolm X, The X Factor, one of the things that was repeated about Malcolm was wherever he went in the world, whatever he did, he always looked at it through the eyes of a brother or sister in Harlem or in Detroit or in Chicago or in Los Angeles. Whatever he came to, he was always thinking through the eyes of his people. And he never deviated from that. He never thought what was good for him. He never thought what was good for something else. He always thought, what's good for my people? And I've somewhat modeled that idea, and we talked about it last week, because while I see our brothers and sisters from Honduras and El Salvador, Guatemala, being treated horrifically, I ask, well, what about us as an African people? When you talk about the trauma of being separated from your family, from your mother, well, what about African children in Africa that were stolen? What about Africans born here in the United States that are then sold away from their family? What about Malcolm X, who when his mother was having great challenges, the family was sent into foster homes? What about that separation? So I'm looking at it from our eyes, but I'm realizing that we have to have a worldview. And we have to look at things from a worldview perspective. While we're looking at our own situation, we are still viewing the world because we must become world citizens. We must understand how to interact with the world at large. And it's something that we'll talk about as our Facebook Lives go on. But I wanted to talk about the science of neuromelanin, the idea of a part of your brain and your brain stem that goes up into your limbic system known as the reticular activity center or system. And I wanted to talk about the relationship between what's called, the RAS. There is also an ascending reticular activity system, which talks about the ascension of this information that comes up through your brainstem up into your limbic system. And I look at it scientifically, not emotionally. Science, straight up science. Because if you can get something to a scientific level, then that means that you can master it. You can do something about it, as opposed to an emotion that can slip from you. How you feel one day, or what you see one day, or what you hear one day. Your reaction to it may be different from one day to another. That's somewhat of an emotional approach. But when you're looking at it as science, you're looking at it as evidence. You're looking at it as it is the way it is today, it's the way it was yesterday, and it will be the same way tomorrow. It is science. It is a formula that follows itself. And so when we're looking at why peoples of European descent would conduct themselves the way they do, because, you know, this treatment of our brothers and sisters on the border, this treatment of African people stolen from Africa and brought here, forced to work against their will, receiving no compensation for it, even to this day. And people now still are tripping about trying to apologize for what has happened to African people over the past 4 or 5 centuries. They're not sorry. They're not sad. I hear people saying, do you have no humanity? No. It's frozen. It's there, but it's frozen. It's frozen like an iceberg. It's something like you take and you put it in water and you freeze it. And then you take it out. It's inside the ice, behind the cold, as Lister Middleton says in his poem on the origins of things. We're looking for something that will never come. I grew up with my mother constantly telling me, you will not get blood from a turnip, you will not get water from a rock, and you will not get morality from the European ethnic stock. And I say it like that because I don't want to talk in absolutes, like I'm branding everybody. But I am branding a group, and I'm holding them accountable, because part of them are guilty by commission. They're doing it. The others are guilty by omission because they're letting it happen. They're being silent. And it becomes important that when we look at the work of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, her concepts of genetic annihilation, the fear of going black, what is it in them that allows them to conduct themselves the way they do? What is it that gives them that heartless, that senseless, that grotesque, monstrous mentality that could ever allow them to conduct themselves the way they do? In one of the White House briefings, the White House press secretary was speaking on what was happening to the children. And one of the reporters, getting caught up in the emotion of the moment, and said, but you're a mother. Have you no sense? Can't you just get to that? Can't you just feel what it would be like if someone took your children from you? Don't you have any soul? No, she doesn't. And you're searching for something that's not there. And for as long as we waste our time trying to get the spirit, the soul of these people to come forward, you're wasting your time. Because that same time that you're looking for the spirit in them, you are not doing something about the spirit within you. And we have to focus on this. But why? What is it in them that makes them so cold, heartless? What would make them act like that with no conscience? Well, we've been talking about it. Their experience in the ice, coming back down into this world. their refusal to participate in other people, making everything about them, making it so that they have created a class of privilege because of their cultural ethnic stock. And the more they get deep in that privilege, the more they deny it exists. So don't think they're going to admit it's there. Believe it. And just go from there. Realize that those words they speak are untruths. They don't tell the truth. And so to become flabbergasted at the amount of untruths they tell is a waste of time. You should know that whatever come out their mouth is going to be an untruth. So therefore, you don't have to fight it, because that's just how they are. They speak with forked tongue. And forked tongue is like, if they tell an untruth, you catch them in it, they tell another untruth. Watch them. You catch them in the second, they tell a third. They will never tell the truth. They are what is called a genetic liar. It is in their genes to lie. They just lie. They lie to be lying. Normally people lie because they're afraid of what will happen if they tell the truth. But there are some people that just lie because they lie. And so what is it? What is this concept of genetic annihilation? There are a couple of things that you can do. For one thing, there is a book. I bought it a number of years ago. Minister Louis Farrakhan spoke about it in one of his Savior Day presentation. And of all people to write it, it was written by Pat Buchanan. Of all people. Republican. One of those. But he wrote a book titled The Death of the West. And in this book, he talked about the dwindling ability for peoples of Eurasian descent to reproduce themselves. They're having a problem reproducing themselves. I've often spoken about a book that I read back in 1994, the summer of 94. It was titled Saving Your Skin by Barney Kennett, K-E-N-E-T, and Patricia Lawler, L-A-W-L-O-R. And I know that there are many people who look at melanin and they look about what happens when you have melanin. Well, this book talks about what happens when you don't have melanin. And it's just very interesting what happens to the body when you don't have melanin. And the threat that that lack of pigmentation has on the ability for the non-pigmented person to get skin cancer or something known as melanoma. Now, there's a difference between a person of African descent with less skin pigmentation and a person of Eurasian descent who was impacted by the Ice Age. There's a difference because skin melanin, your skin is the largest organ on your body, and it is where melanin resides. It happens to be your first immune system. But you also have eumelanin, which is the melanin that's within your body, and you have neuromelanin, which is in your brain. And so it becomes important scientifically that we understand what we're talking about when we speak about the future of peoples of Eurasian descent. There is a phenomenon that's occurring, and it has been occurring for a very, very long time. But because the people who are writing these books, who suffer from white fragility, they don't want to face things. They don't want to focus on things. And so therefore, we never get access to understanding the deeper aspects of the problem. So I would like to direct you to an article that was written in the New York Times this past June 20th, 2018. And basically what the story talks about in a very interesting way is that it's titled Deaths Surpass Births Among Whites in the United States. In other words, when peoples of European die, European descent die, none are born to take their place. And so this concept of see, they've been talking about black folk and about how we are an endangered species. And if they tell that to you enough, you're going to believe it. Black folk are not an endangered species. Now, we're endangered because of the way in which certain law enforcement agents act in our community. Health departments, how they treat us. We are endangered health-wise because of the way they treat us, but it's not an inbred extinction protocol. It's on the outside coming at us that endangers our well-being. Peoples of Eurasian descent are an endangered species because more of them are dying. And let me tell you something else, because we have to understand the reason why they're into this abortion thing, this anti-abortion, has nothing to do with children being born. They don't care about children. If they could kill most black children, they would. In fact, they try. If they could kill most Hispanic children, if they could kill most children of pigmentation, they would. They're trying to protect their own. They understand that when their children, their daughters, are having those physical relationships and getting pregnant, they're realizing that if they're allowed to have abortion, they're literally killing the European ethnic stock. So they're saying, you're going to have them children by hook or by crook. We don't care. And birth control? No birth control. We need you to populate the planet. That's the only way we as an ethnic stock, European, are going to survive. That's this thing about anti-abortion. It ain't got nothing to do about God, God's word. It's not about that. It's about genetic annihilation. The other thing is, what a lot of us don't realize, because they don't talk about it, this big thing with opioid, many of them are dying. See, we got our stuff, crack, heroin, and all the rest of that, unfortunate, horrible drugs that are hurting us as a community. They have it in their community also. But the everyday people who are on opioids, that's what's tearing them apart. The deaths of opioid addiction are phenomenal. They're not reporting it, but it's in this article. June 20th, Sabrina Tavernise, Tavernize. And when I did that presentation last week, I was notified by a sister that had contacted me. And she told me about this particular article that was written, and she even gave me a link to it, which I thank her greatly for. But the night before that, I had been watching, or I had passed the room and I saw Stephen Colbert was talking about this article. I forget who he was talking to. But he was talking about this article that he had read in the New York Times about the fact that peoples of Eurasian descent are dying at greater pace than they are being born. So, when you want to think about the fear that they have, why they act the way they act, why they want to keep peoples of pigmentation, peoples who would be coming from countries that may be Muslim in religion, but pigmentation in culture from all around the world, they understand what's happening. You let them in this country, they will outnumber you eventually. If you allow peoples of Spanish-speaking background to come up from Central and South America, Mexico, you're bringing pigmented people up, and it's going to change the structure of America, they say, by 2050. But I'm going to tell you something that I've said frequently, and that is that by the year 3000, by the time we celebrate the next millennia, the people that we call Eurasians will not be on our planet anymore. Because there's going to be, by geometric progression, a speeding up of their death. And what's going to kill them is melanoma. It's going to be opioid. And when they watch these shows, and when they see those beautiful pigmented children, when they see African peoples, African American peoples, this drives them crazy. They go right over and take another opioid because they need something to calm themselves down. So they're getting deeper into the opioid addiction cycle. This is not a good time for them. And because of that, we're feeling the backlash, such as the young brother that was shot in Pittsburgh. So we shouldn't be surprised when we see what's happening. Little by little, step by step, family, we have to understand what's going on, and we must be surprised that we are surprised at the way in which they conduct themselves. Who of all people should understand why they would do that to those children when they did it to us? Why are we surprised? Why are we searching for something that we have not found in the past 400 years? What has happened over the past whatever that makes you think that they're different, that they're changing, that they want to do the right thing? Again, I'm not speaking in absolutes. That's not what's important. But the reality is that we have got to come to conclusions, and therefore we have to start to study. We have to start to strengthen our spiritual systems. I don't care what spiritual system you practice. We have to Africanize it. When it comes to our economics, we have to Africanize them. When it comes to our labor and hiring practices, we have to Africanize them. When it comes to gender issues, how we as brothers relate to other brothers, how we relate to our sisters, how sisters relate to sisters, and sisters relate to brothers, the gender issues, we have to Africanize them. When we look at education, we certainly have to Africanize that. When we're looking at law, Africanize it. When you're looking at defense, Africanize. We don't have to change it, just interpret it differently. When we're looking at entertainment, Africanize it. Politics, how we govern ourselves, we have to return back to the way we did it at its best. That still has not been replicated to this day. We have to Africanize it. And when it comes to health and nutrition, we have to reach out to those peoples of African descent who understand the African body, the nutrition of the African body, and we have to Africanize it. Because Dr. Clark has that YouTube presentation. You ain't got no friends. If it's to be, it's up to me. That should be our proverb. If it is to be, it's up to me. That is why we have an online school. Shock Metaphysics. Some of the greatest scholars from all different areas come to us and teach us. I've received comments about the work that we have on our website at kabacombinate.com. That's going to get stronger. Why? Because I Africanized it. I'm looking at it from our perspective, family. That's what's important to me. And whatever you're doing in your life, Africanize it. Understand it. Understand why they're doing what they're doing. They are afraid of you. They are afraid of a black planet. It's going to happen. It's going black. You cannot avoid that. That's science. That's not personal. If they didn't separate themselves from the other human family, they wouldn't have the problems that they have now, because they would realize that we're all one race, and that's the human race. And there's only one human race, and that's the African race. I want to thank you, family, for your support and all that you've done to support the work that I'm doing. As you can see, we just completed the documentary on Malcolm X, The X Factor. It's up. You can go to the site and you can purchase it. You can either stream it or you can buy the physical copy. If you buy the physical copy, you'll get the stream free also. We're going to send you the stream because we don't want you to wait for it to get to you in the mail for 2 or 3 days. We're going to let you stream it right now, and then you'll have the physical copy that you'll be able to look at your own leisure. During these next few weeks, I'm going to be producing. A lot of folk have been asking about our T-shirts. and about the Panther Prince t-shirts. And so we'll be producing some of these t-shirts for you, and we'll be putting them up on the website right so that you can order the t-shirts for the summer months. And of course, we have the fitted cap, the X Factor. All of these things are our business. This is black business to me. This is intellectual property and physical property. But we have to get into the business of our people. I want to make this so that it is feasible to go into business, to sell culture, to make culture attractive for us to want to invest in, to make it better, to be able to offer to our children. So I thank you again, family, and I just want you to understand that what you're seeing is not happening by design. It's happening with intentions. It's happening because of genetic annihilation. Our ancestor, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, was absolutely correct. They are afraid of a black planet. And one day, this planet will be the way it was in the beginning. For millions of years, the only humans on the planet were black. Science says it's going to go black to the black. No matter how you look at it. It's black to the black. That's science. Hotep family, thank you for listening. Thank you for participating. I look forward to the next time. Keep on keeping on. It ain't over till we